So, Kuro has finally released some information on the new 4-star weapon series, Poetry and Paean. I am hoping that I'm pronouncing it correctly. And this green series of weapons will be actually 4 stars. And from what I've heard, these are going to be craftable weapons. And so hopefully the idea is that some of the previous crafting materials that we've had, you know, those gray boxes you get from clearing weekly bosses, hopefully they'll carry over into Rinascita, right? Into version 2.0, and we'll be able to use those to actually craft these weapons in the future. Or it might be that they're going to require a different material that it's only going to be gotten for the 2.0 weekly bosses. So we'll figure that out as it comes through. We're also going to take some time to actually see what the weapon effects are and whether or not they're worth crafting, and most importantly, raising up to level 90. Because as we all know, as we're all familiar with at this point in the game, leveling weapons is expensive. It costs like over close to maybe like 1 million shell credits, costs like a lot of different materials, takes, you know, a lot of resources to actually get there. And it can be something where you don't necessarily want to do it unless the weapon is really good. And so with that, let's go ahead and get on into it. The Poetry and Paean, or Poetry and Paean, Poetry and Paean, whatever the fuck it is. Let's keep going. So first off, we're gonna see what the sword is looking like, the Fables of Wisdom. And my oh my, this thing is really green. I'm not sure which color scheme it's supposed to fit into. It doesn't really look like it matches any characters on the roster, and not any of the characters that have been released thus far. Some could say this is the ugliest weapon in gacha gaming, or the ugliest weapon series in gacha gaming, simply from the perspective of it doesn't really seem to fit any character's color scheme. So with that, this is going to be again a 4-star weapon. It draws its design inspiration from the play. We're not really going to read the description. What we're interested in are the stats. And this thing is going to have a very high base attack. This is going to have a base attack equivalent to weapons like the Somme Noir Anchor, that, you know, that pink cat thing that we all got from the 1.4 event, as well as the Endless Collapse, that weapon series from the Black Shores that was released in 1.3. You go ahead and you see it has a high base attack, and it also has a relatively low attack substat. So what this means is that things like Rejuvenating Glow, buffs from Verena, all of these different attack percentage buffs you'll be getting from different sources, including your echoes, they will have a higher impact on this weapon relative to other 4-stars. And what we're seeing is that pretty much every new 4-star that's been released has had this level of benefit. And without it, that means all of those buffs, all of those echo investments, they don't mean as much without a higher base attack. So it's great to see that here, and it's balanced by the fact it has a much lower attack substat. But it's better in a team. The other weapons might be better in a solo run. And so now it's time for us to get into the weapon skill. And this is where stuff gets a little bit spicy because, well, first of all, it talks about stuff that I don't believe is in the game. Dealing damage to enemies with negative statuses increases the wielder's attack by 4% up to 8%.
Well, guys, what's a negative status? I don't know what a negative status is. Are there any negative statuses in the game currently?
And so there are a couple of debuffs that characters can apply, right, to that enemy. And so I'm not sure if that is what the negative status is talking about. Otherwise, you know, there might be debuffs added into the game that are, you know, potentially tied to things like your attributes, or potentially tied to other parts of characters' kits, or even new Sonata sets as a whole. And so what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that we might be seeing some new ways to apply status effects. Otherwise, or new ways to apply status effects that can be used by every single character in the game. Otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, this is what's going to happen. This weapon is only going to be usable, or have a usable passive, right, if you're running specific team cons with specific characters. And that to me is a little bit too specific. That's a little bit too restricting. And that to me is something that I don't think Kuro is going to do, like make an entire new weapon series that only, like, you know, 5 characters on the roster can actually access. That sounds stupid to me. So I think that they're gonna find some general universal way to actually go ahead and apply these buffs, or apply these statuses and in turn get these buffs. However, let's be realistic here. This buff kind of sucks. It's 32% attack. And you might think, oh, well, 32% attack is amazing. That's based off of this base attack of 462. And as we all know, 5-star weapons like the Emerald of Genesis that we all know everybody has at this point in the game, everybody has an Emerald of Genesis, let's just stop fucking playing, that has a base attack of like 587. And so right off of the bat, all of these attack buffs that you're getting aren't as beneficial as simply just like equipping an Emerald of Genesis in the first place. And so, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, ladies and gentlemen, that weapon has crit rate. That weapon also has energy regen built into it. I don't recommend crafting Fables of Wisdom ever, especially when weapons are shareable. This just doesn't seem like something that's ever going to be worth it. Even with the fully stacked up weapon effect at 32%, it's going to take 4 seconds to stack it up as well, assuming that you're attacking 1 time per second. So Think about it this way. Unless you are desperately, like, starting a new account, and for some reason you didn't pull Emerald of Genesis with, like, your free weapon box or something like that, go for it. But you're going to replace this almost immediately with Emerald of Genesis. So, to me, Fables of Wisdom is an L. Moving on to some of the other weapons in the series, we're now going to have the Broadblade, Meditations on Mercy. And so, we don't really need to read the description. It's got the same exact base stats and the same exact effect. And you can imagine here that I might have the same conclusion that I originally had for the previous weapon, right? Fables of Wisdom, the sword. However, one thing for certain is that the 5-star standard Broadblade is kind of feels bad to use on a lot of characters, because what it does is it requires multiple casts of your Resonance skill and boosts Resonance Liberation damage. It kind of really only works with Calcaro, and then Calcaro doesn't even want to use it either because nobody wants to use Calcaro in the first place. So for me, if you're using like a character like Xian, or using a character like Jinxi, or a character like, potentially even Lumi, this might actually be an okay one if you don't have Autumn Trace maxed out to level 5. You know, it's like just a pure attack stat stick, and I think it does kind of do better than the 5-star standard Broadblade when it's fully maxed out. But you're gonna have to make a lot of copies. Again, you can easily replace it with any limited 5-star Broadblade that comes out in the future. Maybe not the best choice, but it's definitely something you can look into. Next up, we've got the pistol. Just use Static Mist. Don't use this thing. Next, we've got the gauntlets. And this is where it might be a little bit tricky, because it's basically the same exact situation as the 5-star Broadblade, where again, the 5-star gauntlets kind of suck. They boost a very specific damage type of, I believe, basic attacks, where, you know, you could have a character like Zhang Liao, which doesn't really use basic attacks. And so Zhang Liao oftentimes has better performance overall with the BP weapon. And if you don't have the BP weapon, you know, you're completely free to play, and you don't want to waste your pulls or waste your standard pulls on the 5-star standard, this might be fine. Think of it as the same sort of situation as the Broadblade. And so lastly, last weapon in the lineup is going to be the Rectifier. And ladies and gentlemen, let me just say that this one could be one of the most usable out of the bunch, because the 5-star Rectifiers are kind of known for having not the highest base attack. For example, Stringmaster has a base attack of 500. This has a base attack of 462. This quite literally has only 38 less base attack than the 5-star weapons. And so it doesn't have nearly the same level of drop-off as, in this stat over here compared to even the 5-star premium options. And so with that in mind, this is going to be probably the best bet in terms of like bang for your buck for all of those materials, all of those expenditures that you're going to be making. And at least on the base attack side, it doesn't fall much shorter than the other weapons in the category. And I mean, just thinking about Rectifiers, they're kind of like the mages of this game. Who knows if they're going to be the best at applying status effects in the first place? And it does look like this could be applicable off-field, this effect. And we all know that Rectifier users do typically do a lot of off-field damage. So, we got characters like Yinlin, we got characters like Jeja that might be able to use this, but, if you have Stringmaster, you're never going to use it. Kind of think about it that way. If you have 5-star limited weapons available, you're probably never going to need to use these. You have the ability to share weapons. These are craftable, though. And so if you have, like, a bunch of the materials sitting in your inventory at any point, and you're like, hey, I just want to build one of these, or I just want to be green, go for it. But at the end of the day, these aren't groundbreaking. These aren't really that ridiculous or crazy. The only thing that seems to be interesting here is their synergy with negative statuses. And so hopefully we can see more weapons in the future that kind of build off of this, but you have to keep in mind that you have to apply the negative statuses in the first place. And so there's a good chance that this buff doesn't even activate until like the end of your rotation when you've done all your damage. So do with that what you will. All right, ladies and gentlemen, but that's going to be the new 4-star weapon series, Poetry and Paean. I think they're a little bit mid. I think they're mainly used to advertise the new mechanics. I would say it's like a decent free-to-play option if you've just started out the game. But if you're 7 months in like me and you've built up quite the inventory and quite the arsenal, don't waste your credits, don't waste your mats building these. But if you're a new player, go for it. And with that, hopefully that was helpful. See y'all later. Peace out.